was sitting in my car outside a small convenience store, staring at the ticket in my hand. The numbers matched. "Hello there, my dear, and welcome to Voice of Granny June. If this is your first time here, this little space is where we share the kind of stories life doesn't explain right away. Stories about quiet moments, difficult realizations, and the things that change us in ways we don't always understand at first." And today's story is not about the money. It's about what happens when something big enters your life, and instead of changing everything around you, it starts revealing something much closer, something already inside your home. So stay with me, because this story doesn't unfold loudly. It unfolds slowly, and by the time you realize what's really happening, it's already too late to step out of it. Now let's continue. For a second, nothing happened. I checked again, slower this time, like something might shift if I gave it another moment. The engine was still running, a low hum filling the space, and somewhere behind me a car door shut sharp enough to notice. I expected something to hit me right there, excitement, disbelief, anything, but instead there was just this quiet, unfamiliar discomfort. A thought slipped in before anything else could form. This shouldn't feel like this. I didn't move. I just sat there holding the ticket, waiting for the right reaction to arrive, but it never did. Outside, everything continued normally, people talking, cars passing, someone laughing in the distance, and that normality made it worse. It felt like I was slightly out of place inside it, like everything was still moving forward, but I wasn't fully part of it anymore. I folded the ticket carefully and placed it in the glove compartment, not out of habit, but because I needed to put distance between myself and that moment. No one would know. The thought didn't come after thinking it through. It landed instantly, clean and complete, like a decision that had already been made somewhere deeper than logic. Not friends, not family, not even my son. I started the drive home the same way I always did, following familiar turns without needing to think about them. But something felt slightly off, not in what I was doing, but in how automatic it all felt. At one of the signals, I stopped like usual, but for a moment I couldn't tell how long I had been sitting there. The light was already green. A car behind me honked, sharper this time, and I moved forward quickly, a little too quickly, as if I had missed something I couldn't name. The rest of the drive continued the same, but that small moment stayed with me longer than it should have. When I walked into the house, the shift was immediate. Outside had been moving, noisy, unaware. Inside was still quiet, familiar, but now it felt contained, almost too controlled. I greeted my son like I always did, kept my voice steady, asked the usual questions, listened, nodded at the right moments. From the outside, it was identical, nothing different, nothing unusual, but it wasn't effortless anymore. Later that night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, not thinking about the money in any practical way. I wasn't planning anything, wasn't imagining anything, wasn't even trying to understand it fully. My mind kept returning to that moment in the car, the stillness, the silence, the way it all felt slightly off from the beginning. I told myself it didn't matter, that nothing had to change unless I let it, that I could keep everything exactly the same if I just stayed consistent. That was enough. It had to be. But one thought stayed there, quiet and persistent. If this was supposed to change my life, why did it feel like I had stepped into something I didn't understand? My son has never been the kind of person you notice immediately in a room, but he notices everything. Not in a way that stands out, not in a way that makes people uncomfortable right away, but in small, quiet ways that are easy to miss if you're not paying attention. He doesn't just see things, he remembers them, and somewhere in the background, he compares them over time. He doesn't say it. He doesn't need to, that's what makes it different. He has this habit when he's thinking. He'll adjust something near him without realizing it, like a glass on the table or a book that isn't aligned properly. Sometimes he'll move it slightly, pause, then move it again until it feels right. It's subtle, almost unnoticeable, but once you see it, you start recognizing when he's focused on something deeper. Not distracted, not nervous, focused. Before that day in the car, none of this felt important. After it, everything did. Our routine had always been simple. Mornings followed the same pattern, evenings settled into the same quiet rhythm, and conversations didn't need effort because they were built on familiarity. He trusted that structure. He trusted me inside that structure. To him, I was consistent, predictable, someone who didn't change without reason. And for a long time, that was true. Now I started noticing things I had never paid attention to before. Not because he had changed, but because I had. Every small action, how I answered him, how long I paused, how I moved through the house began to feel like something that could be measured. With anyone else, those details disappear. With him, they don't, and that stayed with me. One evening, we were sitting at the table, not really talking, just existing in that quiet space we were used to. He was doing it again, adjusting the edge of his glass slightly, then stopping, then adjusting it again. I watched his hand for a second longer than I should have, noticing how precise the movement was, how controlled it felt without looking forced. Then he looked up, not quickly, not randomly, exactly when I noticed. For a brief second, I didn't look away. Something in me held still, like reacting too quickly would confirm something I didn't fully understand yet. His expression didn't change. Nothing about his face gave anything away. But he held the glance just long enough for it to register. Then he looked away again, like nothing happened. That was the first time I felt it clearly. Not suspicion, not fear, just awareness. And once it was there, it didn't leave. The first time he asked about money, it didn't feel unusual at all. We were sitting in the living room, the TV on but ignored, the kind of quiet that didn't need filling. Then he asked, "Do you think people change when they get a lot of money?" It was a simple question, general, the kind you could answer without thinking too much about it. But something about the timing felt placed. Too precise for a moment that didn't ask for it. I gave a normal answer, something balanced, something safe. I said it depends on the person, that money doesn't change who you are, it just shows more of it. It was the kind of response I had probably given before, or at least something close to it. My tone was steady, my posture didn't shift. From the outside, it was just a conversation. He didn't move on. He adjusted the object in front of him again, slightly to the left, then back, then he stopped. The silence didn't feel empty. It felt held, like something was still happening inside it. I became aware of how still he was, not frozen. Just intentional. His posture didn't relax. His attention didn't fully shift away. It was subtle, but it stayed there just beneath the surface. Like he was waiting. For a second, I didn't look away. Something in me held still too, like reacting too quickly would confirm something I didn't fully understand yet. Then I looked away first. The moment broke. The TV filled the space again, the room returned to its usual rhythm, and from the outside, nothing about it stood out. It was just a question, just an answer, just another quiet evening. But it stayed with me, not because of what he asked, because of how he listened. That was the first time it felt different, not enough to call it suspicion, but enough to know it wasn't just a question. The first time it felt real wasn't when he asked a question. It was when he stopped. That morning started like any other. Same routine, same timing, everything moving the way it always had. I went through it without thinking too much, keeping things steady in the way I had been trying to since that day in the car. Nothing stood out, nothing obvious, but I was more aware than usual. I was standing near the kitchen window, checking my phone, not for anything important, just something to fill the space between moments. The screen lit up and I moved through it automatically, not really paying attention to what I was looking at. Then, without trying to, I became aware of something behind me, not clearly, just enough to feel it. I glanced at the window. A reflection. He was there, sitting at the table, still, not looking at me directly, but not looking either. His eyes were angled just enough to avoid attention, unless you were already aware of them. If I hadn't felt it first, I wouldn't have noticed anything at all. I kept scrolling, or at least I made it look like I was. For a moment, I became aware of everything at once. How long I'd been holding the phone, how natural my movements looked, how quickly I should stop without making it obvious. Normally, none of that would matter. Now it did. I locked the screen a second too late. I set the phone down, controlled, measured, then turned slightly, just enough to face the room without making it look like I was reacting to anything. He hadn't moved. One hand rested near the table, a pen between his fingers. He rolled it forward, then back, then stopped. There was a pause, just enough to register. Later that day, without looking at me, he said, "You check your phone more in the mornings now." Not a question. Just a statement. I felt the space before I answered, not because I didn't have one, but because I needed to choose it carefully. I said something simple, something easy to accept, that I had been expecting a message. That work had been a little different recently. Nothing specific. Nothing that could be followed too far. He nodded slightly. That was it. No follow-up, no reaction, no indication that anything about the answer mattered, but it did. Because he had noticed, not just once, more than once, enough to say it without checking, that was the moment it shifted. It wasn't about questions anymore. It wasn't even about answers. It was about observation. And for the first time, it didn't feel passive. It felt directed, like something was quietly narrowing in piece by piece without needing to rush. I moved through the rest of the day the same way I always did. Conversations stayed normal. Movement stayed controlled. Everything held together on the surface. But underneath it, something had changed. Not loudly, not suddenly, just enough to alter the feeling of being in the same room with him. Because now it wasn't just that he noticed things, it was that I could feel it happening. At first, it didn't feel like anything had changed, but it had. It wasn't just observation anymore, it was structure. He still didn't ask direct questions. He still moved through conversations the same way, quiet, controlled, never pushing too hard. On the surface, everything stayed the same. But underneath that, something had shifted into a pattern I hadn't seen yet. I didn't notice it immediately, not in the moment. It only became clear later when I started replaying conversations in my head, when small details began to line up in a way they hadn't before. The questions weren't random, they were placed, carefully, deliberately. One evening, we were sitting at the table again, the same quiet setup we had fallen into so many times before. He was adjusting the edge of his glass, not looking at it, just moving it slightly as he spoke. "Do you remember when the electricity bill went up a few months ago? It caught me off guard, not because it mattered, but because it didn't. It was too small, too specific for no reason. I answered without thinking too much, something vague, that prices change, that things fluctuate, that it wasn't a big deal." He nodded, once. Then he moved on. Or at least it looked like he did. The conversation shifted. The moment passed. Nothing stayed on the surface long enough to question, but later it came back, not the question, the placement. A few days after that, he asked something else. Different topic, different context, same structure, a small detail from the past, something forgettable on its own. Again, I answered naturally. Again, he accepted it. No follow-up, no reaction, just quiet acknowledgement. That's when it started to connect, not all at once, just enough to feel it forming. I paused on it, then it clicked. He wasn't asking for information, he was checking consistency. Each question stood alone, but together they created something else. A comparison, a way to measure whether my answers stayed the same over time, not just in content, but in timing, tone, and detail. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. That was the shift. From that point on, I didn't just hear his questions, I watched them. The timing never felt casual anymore. It felt chosen. Positioned in moments where I wouldn't think too much before answering, which meant something else was already true. He had been doing this longer than I realized. By the time I saw the pattern, I had already answered too many of his questions. And I didn't know which ones mattered. The mistake didn't feel like a mistake when it happened. That was the problem. It was small, almost nothing. The kind of moment that disappears as soon as it passes, unnoticed unless you're looking for it. He asked the question casually. We were in the kitchen this time, not sitting, not settled, just moving through one of those in-between moments where conversations don't feel important. I was pouring water into a glass, not paying full attention, letting the routine carry me. Do you think it's better to save money or use it when you can? Simple, harmless. The kind of question that doesn't need precision, I answered immediately. Depends, probably better to save most of it. Too fast. I felt it the second it left my mouth, not the answer, but the speed of it. Normally, I would pause, even briefly, think just enough to make it feel natural. That's how I had always responded. That's what he was used to. This time I didn't, and he noticed. He didn't react right away. That would have been easier to handle. Instead, he stayed still. The kind of stillness that doesn't interrupt the moment, but holds it in place. The glass in his hand didn't move. His posture didn't shift. He just looked at me, not directly, not fully, but enough. And then there was the pause. It wasn't long, but it stretched, longer than it should have, long enough to feel. For a second, I expected something, another question, a correction, anything that would release the moment. But nothing came. I became aware of everything at once. How quickly I had answered, how unusual that must have sounded, how there was nothing I could do to take it back now. The silence didn't move forward. It stayed there, suspended between us like it was waiting for something else to confirm what had already happened. Then he nodded, once. Small, controlled. And just like that, the moment ended, but it didn't. Because something had shifted, not in what he said, in what he didn't. He didn't follow up, didn't question it, didn't circle back the way he sometimes did when something didn't line up. He accepted it too easily, and that was worse. Because it meant he didn't need anything else from me in that moment. He had already gotten what he needed. The rest of the day continued the same way it always did. Conversations stayed normal, movements stayed controlled. Nothing broke on the surface, but underneath something had changed, not just in him, in me. That night I lay awake longer than usual, replaying the moment over and over again, not the question, not even the answer, the timing. That was the part that stayed, the way it came too quickly, too clean, like I had already been thinking about it before he asked, which meant something else was now true. He had seen it, not the answer, the difference. And once that difference existed, it couldn't be undone. That was the first time it felt undeniable. I wasn't just hiding something anymore, I was slipping. I didn't find it by accident. I found it because something didn't feel right anymore. By that point, I had stopped thinking of his behavior as random. Every question, every pause, every moment of silence had started to carry weight. I wasn't just responding anymore, I was watching the same way he had been watching me, trying to understand what I had missed. That's what led me to his room, not with a clear intention. Just following a feeling I couldn't ignore anymore. The door was slightly open, the room quiet, everything in its place the way it always was. Nothing looked unusual. That almost made me leave, but something kept me there. I stepped inside. His desk was clean, not empty, but organized in a way that didn't feel casual. Everything had a place. Everything aligned just slightly too well. Then I saw the notebook. It wasn't hidden. That was the first thing that felt wrong. It was sitting there in the open, placed neatly near the edge of the desk, like it belonged exactly where it was. No attempt to conceal it. No hesitation in leaving it there, like it wasn't a secret. Or like he didn't think I would understand it. I picked it up. Slowly. There was a moment, just before opening it, where I hesitated. Not because I thought I shouldn't, but because something in me already knew this wasn't going to be small. Then I opened it. The first page wasn't random notes. It was structured. Columns, clean lines separating them. On one side, dates, on the other, observations, not general ones, specific, precise. Morning, phone usage increased, timing inconsistent. I didn't turn the page immediately, I just looked at it. Then the next line. Response delay shorter than usual, topic. Money, eye contact held longer before answering. I felt something settle in place. Not suddenly, but clearly. I turned the page, more of the same, different days, different situations, but the same pattern. On one side, what I used to do. On the other, what had changed. Not guesses, comparisons, measured carefully, deliberately. There was no emotion in it, no assumptions, just observation and difference. Like I wasn't being judged, I was being tracked. I kept turning pages slower now, each one confirming something I hadn't fully accepted until that moment. This hadn't started recently. It went back further, before the questions, before the silence. Before I even noticed anything at all. That was the part that stayed with me. He had been watching longer than I had been aware, and I hadn't seen any of it. I closed the notebook, but the structure of it stayed in my head. The way everything was laid out, the way each detail connected to something else. It wasn't random, it wasn't curiosity, it was a system built quietly, over time, without needing to rush. And for the first time, the thought didn't feel uncertain anymore. It felt clear. This wasn't suspicion. It wasn't even a theory. He knew, or at least he was waiting until knowing wouldn't need to be said. I didn't understand it all at once. That would have been easier. Instead, it came in pieces, small, quiet realizations that didn't feel significant on their own, but refused to leave once they appeared. I sat there after closing the notebook, not moving, not thinking in a clear direction, just letting the fragments settle into place. Each entry I had read didn't just describe something I had done, it described a difference. Not what I was doing now, but how it didn't match what I used to do before. And the more I sat with that, the more something uncomfortable began to take shape. He hadn't been looking for one mistake. He had been looking for change. That was the first shift, because a single mistake can be explained. It can be dismissed, adjusted, corrected, but change, consistent, measurable change, is something else entirely. It builds, it repeats. It leaves a pattern whether you want it to or not. And I had given him that pattern without realizing it. Not through something obvious, not through something careless, but through the way I had tried too hard to remain the same. That was the part that stayed with me. I hadn't acted differently enough to raise suspicion. I had acted consistently enough to create it. I started replaying moments in my head, not in order, not clearly, but enough to see them differently now. The question about money, the silence that followed, the way he watched without asking, the timing of his questions always placed where they wouldn't stand out unless you were paying attention. At the time, each of those moments felt separate, small, almost forgettable. But now they connected, not as events, but as steps. Each one building on the last, each one narrowing something down without ever needing to say it directly. And then it became clearer. He wasn't trying to prove anything to himself. He was removing uncertainty. That's why he never rushed. That's why he never pushed too hard. Every question, every observation, every comparison, it wasn't about finding the answer quickly. It was about reaching a point where the answer couldn't be anything else. And I had been helping him do that. Every time I responded, every time I adjusted, every time I tried to stay controlled, I was giving him more to work with. Not evidence, confirmation, because evidence can still be questioned. It can be incomplete, misinterpreted, challenged. But confirmation built slowly, carefully, over time doesn't need to be defended. It settles into place quietly until there's nothing left to argue against. And that's what I had walked into without realizing it. Not a moment of discovery, a process that had already finished. I sat there longer than I meant to, the room still around me, the notebook now closed but still present in a way I couldn't ignore. It wasn't the details that stayed with me anymore. It was the structure behind them. The way everything connected without forcing itself to. The way it didn't rely on one moment, but on all of them together. That's when the last part settled in. He didn't figure it out because I made a mistake. He figured it out because I changed. And once that change existed, even in ways I couldn't see, it was only a matter of time before he understood it. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just inevitably. He didn't bring it up immediately. After everything I had seen, everything I had understood, I expected something to shift between us right away. Not dramatically, not emotionally, but something that acknowledged what now felt obvious. But nothing happened. The routine stayed intact. Conversations stayed normal. The same quiet rhythm continued, unchanged on the surface. He was still waiting. It happened later that evening. We were sitting at the table again, the same place where most of it had unfolded, the same quiet space that now felt different without anything physically changing. He was there, sitting the same way he always did, one hand near the table, adjusting something slightly without looking at it. A glass this time, small movement, controlled, familiar. Then he stopped and looked at me. There was a pause, not long, just enough to settle the moment into place. "I think you're hiding something." He said it the same way he said everything else. No emotion, no pressure, no accusation, just a statement placed exactly where it needed to be. I didn't respond immediately, not because I didn't know what to say, because I knew this moment wasn't about the answer. It was about how I gave it. "What makes you think that?" I asked. My voice was steady, controlled, the way it always had been. But even as I said it, I knew something had already shifted. That question wasn't going to move the conversation away from anything. It was just part of it. He didn't hesitate. "You've been more consistent than usual." The answer landed quietly, too precise to challenge. I didn't interrupt. I didn't correct him, I just listened. You don't pause the same way anymore, he continued. Not in general, just when certain topics come up. He wasn't guessing, he was explaining. And your answers don't change, he added. Even when the questions do. There was no emotion in it, no attempt to convince me. He wasn't trying to prove anything. He was describing something he had already accepted. I felt the instinct to respond, to explain, to adjust the direction of the conversation in a way that would regain some control. But there wasn't anything to adjust. Every response I could give already existed inside the pattern he had built, so I didn't rush it. I let the silence sit there. For a moment, neither of us moved. The space between us felt different now, not tense, not aggressive, but settled. Like the conversation had already reached its conclusion, and this was just the part where it became visible. "How long?" I asked. It was the only question that felt real. He didn't answer right away, not because he needed time, because he chose not to rush it. "A while," he said, simple, measured, enough. I nodded slightly, more to acknowledge the moment than anything else. There was no point in asking how he knew. I had already seen that. There was no point in denying it. That had already passed, so I asked the only thing left. "Why didn't you say anything?" That was the part I didn't understand. If he knew, if he had known for some time, then why wait? Why go through all of it without saying anything directly? He adjusted the glass again, slightly, then stopped. "I wanted to be sure," he said. And that was it. No elaboration, no justification, just the truth delivered the same way everything else had been. Calm, controlled, complete. And in that moment, the shift became undeniable. I wasn't managing the situation anymore. I wasn't ahead of it. I wasn't even part of building it. I had been inside something he was already finishing. And now there was nothing left to control. I told him, not all at once, not in a dramatic way, but clearly enough that there was no space left for interpretation. The words came out steady, almost the same way everything else had, but this time there was no effort to control them, no need to adjust how they sounded or how quickly they came. I told him about the ticket, about the moment in the car, about the decision I made before I even fully understood it. I told him why I didn't say anything, why I kept everything the same, why I thought that was the safest way to protect what we already had. And through all of it, he didn't interrupt. He didn't react. He just listened the same way he always had, but now there was nothing left behind what I was saying. When I finished, the room felt quieter than it had before. Not tense. Not heavy, just still. He didn't respond immediately. He looked down for a moment, adjusting the edge of the glass in front of him, the same small movement I had seen so many times before. Then he stopped, leaving it slightly out of place this time, like he didn't feel the need to correct it anymore. That was the first thing I noticed. Not what he was about to say, but what he didn't fix. "I didn't think you'd tell me," he said. His voice was calm, the same controlled tone he had used the entire time, but there was something slightly different in it. Not emotion, not exactly, but something less measured, like the outcome didn't need to be managed anymore. "I wasn't sure if you would stay the same." That was the part that stayed. Not the money, not the questions, not even the fact that he had figured it out. That I didn't respond right away. Not because I didn't understand what he meant, but because I did. Everything he had done, every question, every moment of silence, every comparison he had built, it hadn't been about exposing anything. It had been about observing what would happen over time. Whether I would change in a way that couldn't be hidden, whether the version of me he knew would still exist once something like that entered my life. "I tried to," I said. It was the simplest way to explain it. Not that I succeeded. Not that I failed, just that I tried. He nodded slightly like that was enough. And maybe it was, because nothing else needed to be proven anymore. Not to him, not to me. The process had already finished long before this conversation started. This wasn't the moment where anything was decided. It was just the moment where it became visible. We sat there for a while after that, not talking, not needing to. The room felt the same as it always had, but not in the way I had been trying to force before. This time it was natural, not controlled, not maintained, just there, but something small had changed. Not in a way that broke anything. Just enough to leave a trace. Later, as we sat in that same quiet space, he adjusted the glass again, just slightly, then stopped halfway through the movement. He looked at it for a second, then left it the way it was, just a little off. Before, he wouldn't have done that. Before, he would have fixed it. I noticed it. And for a moment, I wasn't sure what it meant. Not completely. Not in a way I could define. But it stayed with me. Because even after everything, even after the truth was out, even after nothing seemed to change on the surface, I still didn't know if that was the moment he decided who I really was. Before you go, my dear, let me leave you with this. Sometimes it's not the big changes in life that reveal the truth, it's the small differences. The pauses, the things that don't quite feel the same, even when everything looks exactly as it always has. And if you felt that while listening to this story, then you already understand more than you think. If this story stayed with you, take a moment to like this video because it truly helps this channel reach people who need to hear stories like this. And I would really love to hear your thoughts, so leave a comment below and tell me, do you think he already knew everything? Or was he still trying to be sure? And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story, because the next one might feel even closer than this. And now, I want you to watch something very important. On your screen right now, you'll see another story. Click on it and continue with me. It's a story where a woman spent 24 years believing in her marriage until one sentence changed everything. My husband said, "I'm leaving." She smiled in that moment too, but what happened after that changed her for the rest of her life. So go ahead, tap on the video on your screen, and I'll meet you there. Until then, take gentle care of yourself, and I'll be right here when you come back.